I worked as a substance abuse counselor and recovery life coach at a drug and alcohol rehab center. Because I'm the new guy, I got stuck with the 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. group therapy sessions. One evening, after I'd finished the last group therapy session for the day, I went back to my office to type up some notes, which typically would take me 30 to 40 minutes. Since most of our substance abuse clients also had criminal records, and because we kept various controlled substances locked up at the facility, I had to walk through the entire building to ensure that every door and window was locked up tight before I left up for the night. My office was at the end of the hall past the front desk, which meant someone could quietly come into the office, and I wouldn't have known it until they were practically in my office with only a window to escape. Given the caliber of some of our clients, I always carried a concealed 9mm handgun and always locked the front door anytime I had to work alone at night. One particular night, I was sitting at my desk typing up my report when I heard the sound of footsteps in the office above me. The footsteps were heavy and sounded like a grown man walking around. No, better, it actually sounded as if he was stomping around in the office above me. Since everyone else left for work at 5, I knew I was completely alone that particular night. Again, I heard the footsteps above my office. So I thought to myself, fantastic. Someone's broken into the office and I've got to be the one to go and confront them. I got up, pulled out my Glock 19, and began doing tactical clearing of the building, and quietly working my way up the stairs. As I neared the doorway at the top of the stairs, I checked the office to my left, then the bathroom next to it, and glanced down the hallway to the office where I heard those sounds coming from. I had a decision to make: clear the rooms to my right or continue down the hallway toward the area where I heard someone. So I opted to head towards the potential threat and then complete my sweep in a clockwise pattern. Quietly glided down the hall, continually checking my 6 until I got to the office and stealthily tried the doorknob. Locked. So I leaned in and listened at the door. Nothing. Turning to my right, I slipped down the hallway towards the group therapy room. Nothing. Then, I nearly pissed myself. Finally, I had to check one last place. The recovery room where we put clients who are going through detoxing. I raised my 9mm, peeked around the corner of the room. What I saw nearly made me piss my pants. In the semi-darkness of the room, sitting on the couch in front of me was what appeared to be a dead woman with a blanket draped over her head and body. Every nerve in my body coursed with electricity as adrenaline jumped into my system. I quietly looked behind me. Nothing. Then I turned back and spoke deliberately to the figure I saw sat in front of me. "I got a gun, and you've got 3 seconds to very slowly pull that blanket down so I can see you. If you don't, I'm gonna shoot you. Do you understand me?" Nothing. I repeated louder. "I am going to shoot you and kill you unless you slowly pull the blanket down so I can see you. Do you understand?" Nothing. I glanced behind me one last time, then cautiously stepped forward with one hand. And I quickly yanked the blanket off and stepped back, ready to let the air out of whomever or whatever was stupid enough to not comply with my orders. Nothing. Nothing but a bunch of couch throw pillows someone had stacked and then casually threw a blanket over, landing just right. With my heart racing, I checked behind me, then hauled tail downstairs, packed up my stuff, and got the Sam hell out of there. The next day, when everyone got to the office, I casually mentioned what had happened to me to a few other employees. They were all unimpressed. "Oh, you finally met one of our ghosts, huh?" What? Ghosts in the plural? "Yeah, there's an upper half of an old man some have seen sitting at our desk doing office work. He never really bothers us, just kind of freaks you out when you walk into your office and see him. Don't worry about him, it's normal. When we see him, he just vanishes. Oh, and there's a little girl you can occasionally hear bouncing a ball. She runs up and down the hallway upstairs as well." They recited all this to me, nonchalantly, like it's no big deal. Like they were reciting a page from the Farmer's Almanac. Just another day, right? To give some context of where this story is based, I live in a smallish college town near a small to medium-sized city. The town itself doesn't really have a lot of people and is mostly here to cater to demand that comes from the college. Because of this, the stores around the college are mostly open 24/7, so that the college kids will be able to impulse buy whatever they like. The other big seller around here is gas. Of course, gas can be bought in the city, but being a town that has often gone through in order to get to the city, a lot of places will try to keep the price slightly lower than any other stations inside the city. This is where my story begins, working overnights in a gas station / liquor store, when I was doing part-time classes in college myself, but most of them were online, so they wouldn't ruin my availability for a full-time job. The store that I worked at had only one person working on overnights for a long time. Even though a lot of people, especially girls, would complain of the lack of cameras and the fact that you don't always get the best people coming into a liquor store in the middle of the night. The owner's hand was forced one night before I started working there. A woman came in to buy milk and went outside to her car, only for a man to come up behind her, shove a gun in her back and demand her money. She complied with him, and luckily, he let her go. She ran into the store, sobbing hysterically. Police showed up shortly thereafter, but he was never found. Myself personally, I like having two people on, even if there wasn't a safety issue. The nights seem to go by much faster when there's someone else there, and it was really nice that a person I normally worked with got along so well. So overall, there were only 4 overnight shift workers: Josh, Nick, Dixie, and myself. Dixie had another job and was really only working there as a favor to one of the managers. She would only work 2 nights a week, either with Josh or myself. Josh and I worked together 3 nights a week, and Nick worked with Josh 1 or 2 nights a week. Dixie was really nice and fun to be around, but she didn't particularly like the job or want to be there. Josh would get annoyed with her a lot for just standing behind the register while he did most of the work. But again, it was only 1 night a week, so he didn't complain too much. Nick, on the other hand, was a bit different. He worked there 5 days a week, just like Josh and I, but they never seemed to put him with one person more than 1 day a week. Nobody seemed to really like him or like working with him. Nick was definitely a little off from the start. He was one of those people who told you his entire life story as soon as he met you, giving a bunch of really personal details that no one was really comfortable hearing. One thing that he always seemed to talk about was the strain on his marriage. Apparently, he had a really bad drinking and drug problem for a very long time. The drug part got better when he switched over to weed, but he still couldn't seem to get his drinking under control. He was hard to be around, but he was just one of those guys you get kind of used to in that kind of job. I was there for almost 3 months when Nick's story seemed to escalate out of complete nowhere. He began telling people that when he was younger, he was diagnosed as a psychopath. He had to take a bunch of pills for it every day so he wouldn't become violent. Not exactly what you want to hear from someone you're working alone with in the middle of the night, but okay. We all have our own problems, right? And some people get dealt a bad hand when it comes to mental illness. I myself have always struggled to get my anxiety and depression under control without medication. I wouldn't be killing people by any means, but I'd probably be hospitalized in the category of danger to self. So, as creepy as that was, I assured him that a lot of people need to take medicine for some kind of illness. And as long as you stick to it and are honest with the medical professionals, there's no reason you still can't do anything anyone else can do. He seemed pleased with this answer, and soon after that, the subject was turned to other things. He was especially cheery and nice to me after that for the next week or so, letting me know daily that he was taking his medicine, and it felt like things were going well with him. I always answered enthusiastically, but I'm pretty sure everyone, especially Josh, was aware of how much I wish he would stop talking to me, and would just kind of leave me alone about it. Josh had a wife and daughter who was 2, so he couldn't help but see us younger girls through the eyes of what his daughter might potentially have to deal with when she reached our age, and seemed to go out of his way to end conversations with Nick rather quickly, which I was grateful for, and didn't really try to pretend that I liked Nick. It wasn't long before Nick started conversations with me going into details about why he was diagnosed, instead of how his medicine was working, which I won't get into here because a lot of it was very violent and sexual. I told him repeatedly that I didn't want to know about that, to which he would act like he understood and then change the subject, only for him to circle back to it an hour or so later. When I confided to Dixie about it, she told me that she would take care of it and told her friend, which was the manager I told you about earlier. Come to find out, the manager couldn't really do much, and it seemed I was the only one that he would talk to about these things. but the manager told me to come to her again if he ever made me feel uncomfortable. It was starting to get increasingly tense for everyone working with him. Soon enough, 2 other women who worked with him on the night shift reported comments that he made to them, to the manager as well. I was questioned, which I agreed that all the statements made up by those women were similar to things that he'd said to me. Nick was then given a final warning and a write-up. On the next couple of times that I saw him, he would go on these rants about how people were there, only reporting him because they didn't like him. I assume he didn't know that I'd been one of those people, and neither I nor Josh had any intention to tell him. He got so angry at one point that he was practically in tears, saying how they're lucky that he was on meds, and what he would do to them if he wasn't. Luckily, it was at that point that his shift ended, and he clocked out soon after. Josh told him that we had a lot of work to get done that night, so we didn't really have time to chat with him. He nodded, walked out the door without another word. Josh really wasn't lying either. The truck had come extremely late that day, so there was still quite a bit of things that needed to be put on the shelf. One thing that the earlier shifts never seemed to want to do, unless they absolutely had to, was stocking the drink coolers. It was true that it was easier to do at night when there were less customers, so it was annoying since we couldn't really talk, but we all just went with it. I can't remember that time that Josh went into the drink cooler, but it must have been pretty late, since we'd all been there for a while at that point. I was still focused on stocking the shelves, and making sure that everything looked full if we didn't have it, when the bell chimed, signaling that someone had come in. I threw out a good evening, I'd be right with you. Usually, there wasn't anyone coming in that late, and if they did, they only wanted a pack of cigarettes or to pay for gas. I put down my box and went to the register. And there he was. It was Nick. And not looking at me, but leaning next to my register. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't afraid. It did turn out that he was just drunk, but I couldn't detect it exactly right away. Even so, I considered for about 30 seconds if I should actually go or if I should run to the cooler and get Josh. Nick wasn't a young fit guy or anything. Years of drugs and drinking had aged him prematurely and ruined his body, but he was definitely still intimidating to a 20-year-old girl. Unfortunately, Nick made the decision for me when he was probably tired of waiting, I guess, turned to me, and that's when I noticed immediately that there was something way off about him. My voice was nothing more than a pathetic whimper when I asked him what he wanted. He just stared at me. I was about to speak again, but he spoke first, barely intelligible because of his slurring. "He'll leave you here alone?" It took me a second to shake my head and tell him again in a steady voice that Josh was in the cooler. I asked if he wanted me to go get him. Again, he just stared at me in silence. At this point, I didn't even care what he said. I just wanted him to say something. The silent staring was really creeping me out. So I asked again, with more force in my voice. "What do you want, Nick?" As soon as I stopped speaking, he grinned at me in a disgusting, almost singing voice. He said, "You're lying. You are alone." He laughed and tried to take a step forward, but stumbled, allowing me to take several steps backwards. At this point, I should have just run to Josh. I should have called for him, anything. But I just couldn't believe that I was reading the situation right, and it was playing right out before me in front of my eyes. Nick was really weird, but I'd never felt actual danger around him before. He'd come off as more a little unstable, if anything else. He continued forward in a slow, stumbling steps, telling me to "Come here, I just want to talk." I kept out of reach, telling him to back up, and that I would hurt him if I had to. He thought that was particularly amusing, and laughed loudly enough that it caused Josh to look through the spaces between the drinks to find out what was going on. Josh was out the door in a second. He seemed to come out of nowhere, shoving himself between Nick and I. No words were spoken. They just stared at each other, and then Josh finally said in a stern tone, "I think you should leave, now." Nick stared blankly for a moment, then scoffed, telling us that we couldn't take a joke. I was trying not to cry at this point. The only thing more terrifying about the situation was knowing that if Josh hadn't been there, and he had somehow caught me, I would have stood no chance against him. Josh left me standing with my back against the wall, corralling Nick to the door. Completely unexpected on both of our parts, Nick turned and took a swing at Josh. And luckily, because he was just drunk or really uncoordinated, he missed Josh's face, and Josh grabbed the back of his coat and brought him down as he smashed his knee into Nick's stomach or chest area. I'm not really sure which. And missed the opportunity of his sputtering to drag him up to the door and throwing him out, locking it. Josh had just turned and told me to call the cops as we heard this sickening crack behind him. We both jumped and looked at the door. There was now this big circle around the glass. It's kind of hard to explain, but if you've ever seen a movie of one or an actual car wreck when something hits a windshield but it's not hard enough to break through and it turns all white from the point of impact, that's what it looked like. Josh didn't have to tell me what to do this time. I ran to the register, grabbed the phone, and went to the corner furthest away from the front door and huddled on the floor. I didn't even notice at the time, but Josh had told me later that when he turned to see the glass, that was the first time that he noticed that Nick had a hunting knife in his other hand. The fact that he tried to punch Josh instead of stab him is a mystery and a miracle. I was sobbing when the operator picked up the phone. I don't even know how she understood me. I was crying so hard, but between my distress and the sounds of Josh and Nick yelling at each other in the background, she got the urgency of the situation. She then asked me where I was. I got up to find a receipt to see what the actual address was, and then the glass smashed. I dropped back to the floor, and she told me the officers were already on their way and to do whatever I could to get away or hide, even if I had to leave Josh behind. The hole wasn't big enough for him to get through, but he had made it. He'd thrown an ashtray from outside through the window. From that hole, he could reach the lock on the door. According to Josh, he walked to the door and put his mouth against the hole that he'd just formed and said something that I'm sobbing right now even thinking about. In that horrible, sing-song voice that he used the first time I talked to him that night, he said, "They're never gonna find you two." Needless to say, as tough as Josh was acting, he was shitting bricks just as much as I was. He was older than Nick, in his mid-30s, but he was a beanpole and wasn't exactly known for his fighting skills. Even so, as soon as Nick unlocked and started to open the door, Josh slammed his body into it, knocking Nick backwards from the impact. Josh yelled for me to run. Even though my legs felt like they would give out at any moment, I ran right behind him to the receiving doors into the back of the store. Nick was cursing and yelling at us as the door jingle went off. Josh slammed back into the back door, cursing in pain as he realized the back door wouldn't open. We found out later that Nick had pushed the dumpster in front of the door, locking the wheels before he came in. We seemed to both realize at once that he actually planned this out. He actually did plan to kill us. Nick rounded the corner, still doing that awkward stumbling walk, though it was faster now. It at least gave me time to slam the back door shut and lock it. As I was sitting in front of it, Josh bringing anything over to try to barricade the door. He must have heard me crying because he kept calling out my name, telling me that I wasn't the one who he wanted, and he would make sure that I died before he even felt the pain, if I would just open up the door for him. He then started stabbing the door and screaming at me to open it. I screamed and moved when he stabbed it the first time, but Josh and I both moved immediately to hold it shut again. I remember Josh and I making eye contact. We were both crying now, and I wanted so badly to say something to comfort him, but I couldn't think of anything to say. I had dropped my phone when we ran to hold the door shut, and neither of us could move to go get it, so we had no idea how long until the police would get there. And this door was made out of wood, so it's not going to last that long against his body slams, and offered little to no protection if his knife actually went through. All I could think was, I'm gonna die here. My dog would never know why I didn't come home, that I wouldn't get my degree and have enough money to actually start enjoying life, that all the plans my girlfriend and I had for the future would never happen. In the most anticlimactic and wonderful finish ever, it suddenly went silent. There were no police car alarms, no yelling, nothing. It was as if Nick had just vanished. Josh and I looked at each other, not even daring to breathe, and listening for any sign of life on the other side of the door. We both slammed to the ground when a gunshot went off once, then twice, then a third time. There was more silence, then a voice rang out, asking if anyone was here. At first we weren't sure if we should say anything. Then a voice continued with his name, that he was an off-duty EMT who had been listening to the scanner. Josh then got up and pushed the things aside in front of the door, opening it just enough to put his head out, and then it seemed like all the breath just left him. He opened up the door and went out into the store, relief completely all over him. I ran and grabbed my phone, seeing that the call had disconnected from the dispatcher, or maybe she had hung up. When I went out into the store where Josh was, and our rescuer was, he was in the middle of explaining how the police over the scanner were sending a bunch of cars, but they were all still really far away, and he had a horrible feeling that they wouldn't get there in time when the dispatcher was telling him what they'd find when we got there. He didn't want either of us to go outside until the police got here because Nick had been shot in the shoulder. He still had the knife when he took off. EMT said he would have ran after him, but with the state that the store was in, he was scared that someone was in here dying or hurt. The next 20 minutes were a blur. Josh and I were sitting on the floor hugging each other. The EMT had called dispatch and told them the new situation, and most of the cars that were coming to our location were diverted to looking for Nick. It was soon after that that Josh got to use his phone to call his wife, and she came right over, only bringing their daughter because he begged her to. He seemed to completely break down when he held his daughter and hugged his wife. I had an extremely similar reaction when I finally got to go home and came in to see my dog's body wiggling excitedly, proudly displaying his flamingo toy for me to have as a welcome home gift. Nick was found 2 weeks later in an old RV in the woods that he'd been using to do his drinking and drugs in, so his wife wouldn't catch him. Apparently, the reason that he'd come after us was because he thought that the reason Josh wanted him to leave so quickly was so that he could call the owner again, and this time, the complaint would get him fired. Unknown to us, his wife had kicked him out 4 days before this happened, and was in the process of getting a restraining order against him over threatening texts and phone calls she had been getting from him. He stated that his job was all he had left, and Josh needed to be punished for trying to take that away from him. He said that I wasn't the target, and he didn't want to have to kill me, but he knew that he had a much better chance of killing Josh with me there than Dixie, since Josh would be more likely to face him to protect me. Neither Josh or I called the owner or even a manager over his comments that night, though maybe we should have. It was disturbing what he was saying, and in hindsight, we were so used to being him a creep and saying horrible things that it didn't even register to us that he could be serious about trying to actually hurt someone. I had known him for 3 months, and Josh had known him for like 6, and he had never done anything violent towards anyone. Everyone just thought he was all talk. We also put in faith in the fact that every employee had a background check on them before they were hired. So it's not like Nick had been violent before. Nick took a plea deal so that the 2 counts of attempted murder would be dropped, and he would instead go to a mental hospital for offenders. The reason I'm writing this story now, other than the other stories on the stub inspiring me, is that I received a phone call just 2 weeks ago, notifying me that as long as there's no setbacks to his health status, Nick is set to be released June 8th of this year. When I called Josh, he had said he received the same news the day before. Neither Josh or I work there anymore, and Josh has since moved away to another town on the other side of the city. I have switched to going college completely online, and am in a new place that I'm renting with a roommate. I don't think he'll come after either of us. I don't see how he could blame us for what happened. I read so many of these stories, and after the fact, everyone seems to be prepared for what they have to do if ever they see the person again that they're writing about. I don't think I'd be any more prepared to face him this time than I was back then. I've had pretty intense nightmares every day since, but ever since I got the call, every time I close my eyes, all I can hear is that one sentence louder and clearer. They're never gonna find you two. Nick, if it was true that you were diagnosed as a psychopath, I hope you're getting the help you need. You've already destroyed my peace of mind, and even now, years later, I don't feel safe, especially at night. I don't believe in God, but I pray to anyone that's listening to me that we never meet again. I used to work night shift at a nursing home. I had just started doing my nightly pickup of laundry outside the rooms where they leave their laundry bags. There was a man I'll call Chuck who was a resident. He hated leaving his laundry outside his door because he thought he wouldn't get his clothing back. After reassuring him for the umpteenth time, he finally let me take it. This particular night started off pretty strange. Lights were flickering, residents seemed uneasy, unfitful sleeping, and walking around aimlessly. We tried to get everyone back in the rooms and get them to bed. I did notice that Chuck wasn't out, but then again he wasn't really the social type, so I brushed it off. As I'm doing my rounds, I see Chuck dressed and standing at the end of the hallway where his room is, so I say to him, "Chuck, why are you dressed and out of bed? It's late." He turns towards his room and goes back in. I finish with that end of the hall and start walking toward his room. As I approach, the lights in the hallway go out, so I have to turn my cell phone on and use the flashlight. Chuck is now standing on the other end of the hall, the one I just came from. Confusedly, I say, "Chuck, how did you do that?" He then walked toward the game room, behind a wall, and I lost sight of him. I call my supervisor and let her know that Chuck is walking around in the dark and I'm too scared to walk in there alone to get him. Send security to help me find him. Security showed up not long after that, and we go into the game room. No Chuck. Security then asks if I'm sure I saw him, and I tell him that I'm absolutely sure. Let's go back to his room. This time I'm completely dumbfounded as to how this is even happening. We enter Chuck's room, only to find out that Chuck has passed away. No alarms even went off on his monitor, nothing to alert us that he was in any distress. The clothes, the same ones that I saw him in, were in a bag with a note on the top that said, "I couldn't take them with me." I still get chills when I tell the story. Weird night. Thanks for listening if you stuck around to this point. If you haven't yet, please hit the like button, the subscribe button, and that notification bell to be notified when future episodes come out. If you have a true scary story of your own, feel free to send it to my email or post it to my subreddit. Sorry, my foot itches. You can stalk me on Twitter, you can stalk me on Facebook, and you can stalk me on Instagram. All these links are below. What's going on, everybody? Happy Valentine's Day. Hope you're enjoying it with your friends, your family, with no one, with yourself, if that's even the case. I was gonna do some Valentine's Day stories, but I couldn't find hardly any. I think I found one that kinda was a Valentine's Day story, but wasn't. Valentine's Day stories are so niche and so random. I don't know. There's a lot of them out there. There's a lot of other channels out there that are doing Valentine's Day stories. So sorry you're not getting them here. Instead, you're getting night shift stories. So hopefully you're cool with that. If not, then, well, not sure why you're listening, but I got, let's see, what was it? Trucker stories, more trucker stories. I got some other ideas lined up, so I'll be working on those as well. And then your regular prescribed true scary stories, true horror stories on Thursday, like I normally, sorry, burped, normally do for you. And yeah. Hope you enjoy it. Happy Valentine's Day. I hope I get some tacos, because that's really all I want, is maybe like a big 4 to 6 carne asada tacos, and like maybe a heart shape. That would be with cilantro, onion, lime, maybe some grilled jalapenos or something on top of it with some hot salsa. Oh my god, that sounds incredible. That's all I want for Valentine's Day, so that's what I'm going to get, even if I gotta get it myself. All right. See you for trucker stories. See you for true scary stories on Thursday. And I think I'm gonna drop a short today too. I'm not sure when, but gonna do that. And that's it. That's all. That's it. That's it. What are you still doing here? Stop listening to me. Go away. Go stuff your face with some tacos or some candy or whatever you do. Put it up your butt. I don't care. All right. Cheers. See you in the next one.